In the official history of Pride Lands, a bird named Zazu is usually perceived as an insignificant character, a loyal servant, a jester, a messenger, colorful, but secondary. That is the image we are used to. But what if this unremarkable bird is actually one of the most influential political figures in the kingdom? What if, beneath the mask of a simple courtier, there lurks a true ideologue and defender of the dynastic tradition of Pride Lands? When we carefully analyze Zazu's position in the political structure of the savannah, a completely different picture emerges. Major Domo is Zazu's official title. It's not just a funny foreign word. In historical monarchies, a major domo is the highest administrative position at court, a person who effectively manages state affairs on behalf of the king. In some kingdoms, major domos wielded such power that they became de facto rulers, and sometimes even founders of new dynasties. Take a closer look at Zazu's duties. He is not just Mufasa's servant. He gathers and analyzes information throughout the kingdom, prepares daily reports, monitors border compliance, organizes ceremonies, and interacts with other species on behalf of the king. In fact, Zazu acts as the head of government under the monarch. The key to understanding Zazu's true role is the famous morning report scene. Pay attention to this seemingly routine ritual. Mufasa doesn't just listen to the news. He makes decisions based on the data that Zazu has gathered, analyzed, and presented to him. Without this flow of information, the king would be cut off from the life of his kingdom. The full extent of Mufasa's power rests on the administrative system headed by Zazu. It is noteworthy that Zazu is the king's only direct advisor on secular matters. Rafiki performs spiritual functions, but it is Zazu who is responsible for day-to-day management. This separation of powers creates a system of checks and balances, preventing the monarchy from turning into a tyranny. The fact that the administrative advisor represents a completely different species guarantees his independence. Zazu can never claim the throne himself, which means he can serve the crown impartially. And here we come to a fundamental question. Why a bird? Why would a lion monarchy entrust such an important position to a representative of a species that has no physical strength in a world ruled by the law of the jungle? The official version is extremely unconvincing. According to it, we are supposed to believe that in a world where reptiles, mammals, and birds are in constant competition for resources, lion rulers simply decided on a random basis to appoint a blue tit to the highest administrative post. This version does not stand up to scrutiny for several reasons. First, social structures in nature are usually formed on the basis of species. Interspecies political alliances require compelling reasons and a historical basis. Second, trust between different species does not arise spontaneously. It is built up over generations. Third, the specific knowledge of royal protocol, dynastic traditions, and administrative procedures that Zazu possesses cannot be acquired during the short service of a single king. Even more curious is that Zazu demonstrates awareness of events that occurred before he could theoretically have been appointed by Mufasa. He knows the intricacies of dynastic history, the rules of succession, diplomatic protocol, and even the characters of other rulers in neighboring territories. Such depth of knowledge suggests a long stay at the center of the political processes of the Pride Lands. Let's look at another aspect. Zazu has exceptional immunity from the food chain. In a world where the circle of life is strictly observed and each species occupies its niche in the food chain, Zazu moves freely among predators, and no one considers him potential prey. Even in critical situations, when the natural balance is disrupted and predators are starving, Zazu remains untouchable. This is only possible thanks to an ancient and unbreakable agreement between species, elevated to the status of sacred law. Further confirmation of Zazu's special status is his behavior. Despite the difference in physical size and strength, he allows himself to criticize the king, express his own opinion on political issues, and even reprimand the heir to the throne. Such freedom is unthinkable for an ordinary servant. It is only possible for an official whose position is guaranteed by something greater than the personal favor of the current monarch. Finally, the most convincing evidence. When Scar takes the throne, he does not get rid of Zazu, but imprisons him in a cage. For a usurper seeking to sever all ties with the previous regime, it would have been logical to eliminate the former king's chief advisor. However, Scar does not simply spare Zazu's life. He keeps him at court, albeit in confinement. This suggests that even a radical ruler like Scar recognized the institutional importance of Zazu's position and did not dare to completely eliminate this political institution. All these facts indicate that Zazu's role in the Pride Lands system of power is much deeper and older than is commonly believed. The most logical explanation is that Zazu's position represents an ancient institution that has existed for many generations of Pride Lands rulers. Perhaps this institution even predates the current royal dynasty. History knows many examples when, in addition to the dynastic line of rulers, there was a parallel line of advisors, guardians of traditions, or ministers, passed down by inheritance in certain families or clans. In ancient Egypt, priests retained their influence under successive pharaohs. In Japan, the Fujiwara clan controlled the imperial administration for centuries, and in medieval Europe, some noble families held important government posts for centuries. What if, in Pride Lands, the role of chief advisor and administrator traditionally belonged to birds of a certain species, or even a specific family line? This would explain both the level of trust between different species and Zazu's depth of knowledge about royal affairs. A natural question arises. If Zazu's position is so ancient and important, why is it not mentioned explicitly? A possible explanation is that the high status of invisible power is often deliberately concealed. Maintaining the appearance of absolute power of the monarch is a typical technique in many political systems. Real administrators prefer to remain in the shadow of the throne, maintaining the illusion that all decisions are made exclusively by the crowned head. By analyzing the historical role of bird advisors in various political systems, we can find analogies to Zazu's position. From Middle Eastern traditions, where birds were considered intermediaries between heaven and earth, to European courts, where falconry became an art of statecraft through symbolic rituals, feathered advisors have always occupied a special place in power structures. In the next part, we will examine the historical context that preceded Mufasa's reign and gather evidence that the political institution represented by Zazu existed long before Simba's father ascended the throne, possibly even during the reigns of his predecessors, Ahadi and Mohatu. To understand Zazu's true role in the political system of the Pride Lands, it is necessary to carefully analyze his formal duties and actual powers. The canonical version presents Zazu as a major domo, a master of ceremonies and personal assistant to the king. However, a careful analysis of his actions shows that his actual functions go far beyond this definition. Among Zazu's official duties, we see organizing daily royal audiences, gathering information about the state of the kingdom, coordinating interaction between different species of animals, ensuring border security, participating in diplomatic missions, and organizing important state ceremonies. In fact, these are the functions of an entire government apparatus concentrated in the hands of a single official. Let's pay attention to the visual symbolism associated with Zazu. His bright plumage is not just a natural feature. In the animal world, bright colors often serve as a signal of special status or toxicity, warning others of the danger of encroachment. The blue color of Zazu's feathers is a traditional color of power in many cultures, symbolizing the sky, divinity, and nobility. The red beak is a color associated with power, strength, and authority. It is noteworthy that even hyenas show unusual respect in Zazu's presence, despite their ability to easily kill the bird physically. From a historical perspective, Zazu's position has clear parallels with institutions in real monarchies. Like the Lord Chancellor in the British tradition, Zazu acts as the keeper of the royal conscience, ensuring the continuity of state policy. As the keeper of the royal seal in medieval European states, he controls access to the monarch and verifies the authenticity of royal decisions. A comparison with the viziers of Eastern despotisms is also appropriate. An advisor whose power is based not on personal strength, but on knowledge and administrative abilities. A key aspect confirming our theory is Zazu's depth of knowledge about the dynastic traditions of Pride Lands. He demonstrates awareness of the events and customs that preceded Mufasa's reign. For example, Zazu knows the genealogy of the royal family in detail, the intricacies of ceremonial protocol, and the history of relations with neighboring territories. Particularly telling is his knowledge of the elephant graveyard, a place that existed long before Mufasa was born. This knowledge cannot be acquired in a single generation or during a single reign. Visual analysis reveals another significant aspect. Zazu is the only representative of his species at court. The absence of other similar birds in the king's entourage confirms his unique status. This corresponds to the historical practice of designating separate families or castes to perform specialized state functions. In ancient societies from Egypt to India and China, there were hereditary positions that were passed down from generation to generation within a single family or a limited group. Zazu's autonomy in decision-making is disproportionately large for an ordinary servant. He not only conveys information to the king, but also interprets it, proposes political solutions, and sometimes acts independently on behalf of the crown. Particularly indicative are episodes when Zazu makes decisions on diplomatic or security issues without prior consultation with Mufasa. At the same time, his actions do not raise any objections from the king, which confirms the legitimacy of his authority. It is also politically significant that Zazu interacts directly with the heir to the throne, participating in his education and preparation for future rule. He does not simply look after the young Simba. He passes on to him knowledge about the kingdom, its customs and traditions. This is the function of an institutional mentor, historically performed by state officials specially appointed for this purpose. In the Pride Land system of government, Zazu is one of the elements of a complex structure of checks and balances. The king has supreme power, but it is not absolute. His decisions are mediated through a bureaucratic system headed by the majestic. The spiritual aspect of power is controlled by Rafiki, who performs functions similar to those of a high priest or court astrologer. Economic power is distributed among representatives of different species that control various resources of the savanna. This system of separation of powers could not have arisen overnight. It was formed over generations. Let's pay attention to the reaction of other animals to Zazu. They show him respect not out of fear, as in the case of predators, but out of respect for his position. Even elephants, physically superior to any other animal in the savanna, including lions, recognize the majordomo's authority. Such an attitude is formed over decades, if not centuries, of institutional presence. The first direct evidence that Zazu served in Pride Lands before Mufasa's reign can be found in his knowledge of the historical conflict between lions and hyenas. Zazu knows the details of the ancient feud between these species, which dates back to the time of Mufasa's ancestors. He has information about territorial disputes and border violations that took place long before the current reign. This knowledge suggests that Zazu or his predecessors were present during the resolution of past conflicts. There is also circumstantial evidence that requires deeper contextual analysis. For example, Zazu's familiarity with Mufasa. Despite the strict hierarchy of the animal world, Zazu allows himself to joke, be ironic, and even criticize the king. This level of trust suggests a long-standing relationship, possibly dating back to before Mufasa's accession to the throne. Zazu probably served under Mufasa's father, Ahadi, and witnessed the transfer of power. Zazu's symbolic presence during important dynastic ceremonies deserves special attention. He does not simply observe. He actively participates in the rituals, demonstrating his knowledge of their symbolic meaning and historical context. At the same time, other animals unquestioningly recognize his right to participate, which testifies to the traditional nature of his role. Zazu's reaction to Scar's usurpation is also very telling. He does not express personal disappointment at the loss of his position. Rather, he demonstrates institutional concern for the fate of the entire kingdom. His warnings and protests are not based on personal attachment to Mufasa, but on an understanding of the principles and traditions of the state that Scar is violating. Another significant aspect is Zazu's territorial mobility. Birds are naturally capable of traveling long distances, and Zazu actively uses this ability in the interests of the crown. He regularly flies along the kingdom's borders, visiting remote corners of the Pride Lands and neighboring territories. This function as the eyes and ears of the king makes him an essential tool of state administration, providing a link between the center and the periphery. Historically, this role was often assigned to certain families or clans, creating a kind of hereditary bureaucracy. When monarchs changed, these clans ensured the continuity of power and the transfer of administrative traditions. In some cases, such positions even preceded royal power itself, transforming over time from autonomous political institutions into elements of the monarchical system. It is noteworthy that the Zazu interacts not only with the royal family, but also with representatives of other species on behalf of the king. He acts as a diplomat, negotiator, and arbitrator in interspecies conflicts. This function requires the long-term establishment of a reputation and trust on the part of all inhabitants of the savanna, which is impossible to achieve during a short period of service under one monarch. All these facts add up to a single picture. Zazu's position is an ancient political institution that has existed for several generations of Pride Lands rulers. This institution ensured administrative continuity and stability of government during changes of monarchs. Most likely, Zazu's ancestors served under Ahadi and possibly his predecessor, Mohat. This theory explains Zazu's mysterious knowledge of past political crises, dynastic traditions, and diplomatic relations with neighboring territories. As a representative of a hereditary administrative line, Zazu received not only formal knowledge of his duties, but also institutional memory. Informal practices, precedents, and traditions passed down from one generation of royal advisors to another. In this context, it becomes clear why Zazu was so concerned about the future of the kingdom after Mufasa's death. For him, it was not just a personal crisis, but a potential break in dynastic continuity that threatened the entire political system of the Pride Lands, which his family had served for generations. In the next part, we will look at more specific evidence of Zazu's historical role as guardian of the crown and analyze the political mechanisms through which he exercised his influence over several reigns. Looking at Zazu through the lens of political theory, we discover his fundamental function, to serve as the guardian of constitutional tradition in the Pride Lands. In the absence of written laws in the animal world, it is precisely such institutionalized positions that ensure the continuity of the state structure and the transfer of governance practices between generations of rulers. First, let us turn to the visual evidence of Zazu's special historical status. The first is his permanent place next to the throne. At all official ceremonies, Zazu occupies the position immediately to the right of the king, the traditional place of the highest administrator in the protocol hierarchy of many monarchical systems. This spatial symbolism is not accidental and reflects the real distribution of power. The second visual evidence is the special nature of his interaction with the king. Zazu is the only creature in Pride Lands who is allowed to interrupt the monarch, speak to him without formal permission, and even touch him during communication. This privilege is unprecedented in the strictly hierarchical world of animals and indicates a special institutional status. The third piece of evidence is Zazu's personal, official insignia. Note that during official ceremonies, Zazu often holds a leaf resembling a scepter or staff, symbolizing his authority. This attribute of power is comparable to historical regalia, such as the Lord Chancellor's seal or the ceremonial staff. The fourth observation concerns Zazu's flight paths. His regular flights over the territory follow a fixed pattern reminiscent of the traditional administrative tours of senior officials in historical monarchies. These routes cover key strategic points, borders, and ceremonial sites in the Pride Lands, forming a spatial image of the state. The fifth piece of visual evidence is the reaction of other species to Zazu's appearance. Even large animals, including elephants and rhinos, immediately pay attention to his arrival and show respect. This attitude is characteristic of the perception of established state symbols, rather than specific individuals. Linguistic analysis of addresses and titles also confirms our theory. Zazu addresses Mufasa as Sir, a formal title used when addressing monarchs. At the same time, Mufasa himself calls Zazu by his name, without additional titles, which is typical for a monarch addressing a high-ranking official whose status does not require additional confirmation. It is noteworthy that other animals, including the lionesses of the royal pride, address Zazu with obvious respect, using formal constructions. Zazu's manner of speech deserves special attention. He uses archaic phrases, diplomatic formulations, and administrative terminology that are not typical of everyday communication. His language is saturated with references to historical precedents and traditions, which indicates a deep institutional memory. The key twist in our theory is that Zazu represents an institution that existed before Mufasa and is independent of any particular king. When we analyze his actions at critical moments in the dynastic history, it becomes clear that his loyalty is directed not so much toward an individual ruler as toward the crown as an institution and the traditions associated with it. The most convincing confirmation of this theory is Zazu's behavior during Sher's usurpation of power. Instead of fleeing or resisting, Zazu remains at court even after being removed from office. This is the action of a man who feels responsible to the institution of monarchy regardless of the personality of a particular monarch. Zazu continues to perform his ceremonial duties even in captivity, preserving the continuity of the administrative tradition. Zazu's interaction with Rafiki is a classic example of the separation of spiritual and secular power. These two characters embody different aspects of the state structure. Rafiki is responsible for the sacred legitimacy of power, rituals, and connection with ancestors, while Zazu provides practical administrative management. They rarely interact directly, which is characteristic of the historically established separation of powers. At the same time, both figures maintain independence from the ruling monarch, ensuring institutional stability. The historical necessity of Zazu's position is evident when analyzing the administrative needs of a lion monarchy. As predators, lion rulers could not effectively interact with most of their subjects without an intermediary who did not instill instinctive fear. In addition, the physical limitations of lions, inability to fly, relatively low speed of movement, made it necessary to have a mobile official who could quickly move around the kingdom and beyond. Another aspect of historical necessity is the need for institutional memory. The lifespan of lions is relatively short on a national scale. Without a parallel line of transmission of administrative knowledge and traditions, each new monarch would have been forced to reinvent the wheel, losing the experience accumulated by his ancestors. A position similar to that held by Zazu solved this problem by ensuring the continuity of administrative practices. Many signs indicate that Zazu's position is hereditary. The level of his specialized knowledge and skills suggests long-term training from an early age. His behavioral patterns demonstrate traits characteristic of hereditary officials, a combination of formal deference to the monarch with actual administrative autonomy. Furthermore, the very fact that Zazu belongs to a rare species of bird confirms the exclusive nature of his position. Examples of similar hereditary administrative lines can be found in the history of many civilizations. In Byzantium, the families of Logothetes and Protospatherii passed their positions down through generations. In Imperial China, certain official positions were traditionally held by members of specific families. In medieval Japan, the positions of regents for young emperors were passed down within the Fujiwara and Hojo clans. This system served an important function. It kept potential authoritarian tendencies of the monarch in check. Since birds couldn't physically claim the throne, they were the perfect administrative counterweight, influential enough to limit the king's power, but not able to directly take over. Zazu demonstrates the characteristic features of a guardian of the constitutional order. He constantly reminds the heir to the throne of his future duties, monitors compliance with traditional decision-making procedures, and ensures information transparency in the kingdom. In critical situations, he appeals not to the personal will of the king, but to established practices of governance and precedents from the past. The most revolutionary assumption of our theory is that Zazu is not just a single advisor, but a representative of a whole line of royal butlers who have served the Lion dynasty for many generations. His knowledge, manners, and privileges are the result of centuries of evolution of this position, which has adapted to the needs of the monarchy. This theory is confirmed by Zazu's knowledge of state secrets, known only to a narrow circle of close associates of previous monarchs. For example, he knows the details of complex diplomatic relations with neighboring territories, dating back to the reign of Ahad, or even earlier kings. He also demonstrates knowledge of ancient royal privileges and prerogatives, many of which remain unused in modern pride lands, but are preserved in institutional memory. Indirect confirmation of the long history of Zazu's position is provided by his attitude toward various aspects of royal power. He shows varying degrees of commitment to different traditions. Some he defends zealously, while others he treats more flexibly. This is typical behavior for an institutional guardian who evaluates traditions in terms of their historical significance and practical value to the state. Particularly noteworthy is Zazu's ability to adapt his administrative functions to the personal qualities of a particular monarch. He builds relationships with Mufasa, taking into account his fair but sometimes impulsive character, ensuring the necessary balance in decision-making. This ability to be flexible in administration while remaining faithful to fundamental principles is a sign of a position that has evolved over several reigns. There is also Zazu's mysterious awareness of past political crises. He refers to times of drought, invasions by enemy prides, and other historical trials as if he were an eyewitness, even though these events took place long before he was likely born. Such a level of detail is only possible with the systematic transfer of knowledge from predecessors to successors within a unified administrative line. One of the most intriguing aspects of our theory is the question of how exactly the new majordomo was appointed when a new king ascended the throne. An analysis of behavioral patterns suggests the existence of a specific recognition ritual in which the new monarch officially confirmed the powers of the royal majordomo, possibly a descendant of the previous one. This ritual could have been integrated into the general coronation ceremony or conducted separately. An additional argument in favor of our theory is the fact that Zazu's administrative style demonstrates elements of different historical eras, as if reflecting the evolution of the position. It combines an archaic reverence for the sacred status of the monarch, characteristic of the early stages of statehood, with the pragmatic professionalism of more mature bureaucratic systems. A careful analysis reveals that Zazu acts as a living archive of the kingdom. He preserves and transmits not only explicit knowledge about state affairs, but also an implicit understanding of the spirit of the laws of the Pride Lands, the unwritten principles and values that underpin the monarchy. This function is particularly important for ensuring continuity when rulers change and preventing radical deviations from the traditional course. In the next part, we will examine the unexpected connection between Zazu's position and previous kings, and analyze how his role as dynastic guardian influenced key moments in the political history of the Pride Lands, including the period of Scar's usurpation and the subsequent restoration of legitimate power. Our theory of Zazu as a representative of an ancient administrative institution takes on a new dimension when we turn to rare but significant references to Mufasa's predecessors. There is compelling evidence that Zazu's family served previous kings, including Ahadi and possibly even the legendary Mahatu. The first evidence is found in the moment when Zazu mentions the times of great drought, a historical crisis that occurred during the reign of Mahatu. He describes the details of this event with a precision that would be impossible for a mere storyteller. His account includes specific administrative measures taken by the monarch and their long-term consequences for the political structure of the Pride Lands. Such knowledge implies direct access to the royal archives, or an oral tradition passed down within the line of court administrators. The second piece of evidence is Zazu's references to the old borders and ancestral territories of the Pride Lands. He demonstrates precise knowledge of the territorial changes that took place under Ahad, when the kingdom expanded eastward after a dynastic alliance with a neighboring pride. This information is strategic in nature and was unlikely to be publicly available. It was most likely passed on within a closed circle of senior state officials. The third piece of evidence relates to Zazu's ceremonial knowledge. He describes in detail the rituals and protocols that existed at the court of Ahadi, but fell into disuse under Mufasa. His comments on the old-fashioned procedures for receiving foreign guests or holding seasonal celebrations indicate the continuity of ceremonial knowledge passed down from one generation of royal majordomos to another. The fourth piece of evidence is Zazu's genealogical knowledge. He mentions distant relatives of the royal family, including side branches of the dynasty that split off during the reign of Mahatu. Such detailed genealogical information was traditionally kept by officials specially appointed for this purpose, who were responsible for the legitimacy of the succession to the throne. The fifth piece of evidence is the nature of the relationship between Zazu and the oldest members of the Pride. The lionesses who remember Ahadi's reign show special respect for Zazu, not because of his personal qualities, but because of his institutional status. These nuances of interaction suggest a long history of cooperation between the royal family and the line of majordomos. An analysis of Zazu's behavior during Shram's usurpation of power reveals the very essence of his true role in the political system of Pride Lands. At this critical moment, Zazu acts not as a personal servant of the late king, but as a guardian of the constitutional order, seeking to minimize the institutional damage caused by the illegitimate change of power. Zazu's initial reaction to Shram's rise to power is telling. He does not attempt to challenge the fact of the change of monarch, but insists on adherence to traditional procedures of governance. His objections are not directed at the new ruler personally, but at the violation of fundamental principles of the functioning of the monarchy. Above all, the principle of balance between the different species of animals that make up the kingdom's ecosystem. The key theory explaining why Shram left Zazu alive is the need to legitimize his power. Even a radical reformer like Scar understood that the complete destruction of traditional institutions of power would undermine the legitimacy of his own rule. Preserving the position of royal majordomo, albeit in a limited form, created the appearance of continuity and softened the perception of the coup by other animals. The symbolic analysis of Zazu's imprisonment is also very revealing. Scar does not abolish the institution of the royal majordomo, but merely limits its functions, preserving its symbolic presence at court. It is noteworthy that even in confinement, Zazu continues to perform ceremonial duties. For example, announcing the arrival of guests and commenting on the king's decisions. This indicates the ritual necessity of his presence for the legitimization of monarchical power. During Shram's reign, Zazu demonstrates remarkable steadfastness, remaining committed to traditional values even under threat of physical violence. He continues to recall historical precedents, point out violations of the traditional balance, and warn of the long-term consequences of destructive policies. This principled stance is characteristic of institutional guardians whose loyalty is directed not toward a specific monarch, but toward the state tradition as a whole. Particularly telling are episodes in which Zazu, at Shram's court, appeals to the old laws and centuries-old customs of Pride Lands. He acts not simply as a critic of the new regime, but as the living embodiment of the institutional memory of the state, reminding us of the long-term strategic interests of the kingdom, which stand above the tactical decisions of any individual ruler. The main aha moment of our theory lies in understanding Zazu's true role in ensuring the continuity of the dynasty. He acts not simply as a courtier, but as a guarantor of the continuity of state tradition, linking different generations of rulers. His actions are aimed at preserving the basic principles of the Pride Lands state structure, regardless of the identity of the particular monarch. This role is particularly evident in the period between Mufasa's death and Simba's return. Zazu does everything possible to minimize the destructive consequences of Scar's tyranny, preserving elements of traditional governance and supporting the legitimacy of the institution of monarchy itself, despite the illegitimacy of the specific ruler. A comparative analysis of Zazu's actions under different rulers reveals a striking consistency in his principles. Regardless of the monarch's personality, Zazu defends the same fundamental values: the balance of the ecosystem, justice, respect for traditional procedures, and the territorial integrity of the kingdom. This consistency of beliefs points to the institutional nature of his position, which exists independently of individuals. Under Mufasa, Zazu acts as a classic constitutional advisor, ensuring a balance between royal initiative and established traditions. He supports the monarch's reformist initiatives but monitors their compliance with historical precedents and the spirit of the Pride Lands state tradition. Under Scar, Zazu's role is transformed. He becomes a passive guardian of tradition, recording violations and preserving institutional memory for the future restoration of the legitimate order. Even deprived of real administrative powers, he continues to perform a symbolic function, reminding people of the existence of an alternative, traditional model of power. With Simba's return, Zazu once again proves himself to be an active statesman, contributing to the rapid restoration of traditional institutions and procedures. His knowledge of the functioning of the state apparatus proves invaluable to the young, inexperienced king who grew up far from the court. The institutional memory embodied in Zazu's position includes not only formal knowledge of royal genealogy and ceremonies, but also a practical understanding of the mechanisms of power. He keeps track of traditional alliances and conflicts between different animal species, seasonal migration routes, historical rights to watering holes and hunting grounds. In short, the whole complex web of relationships that make up the political reality of the Pride Lands. A particularly important aspect of the institutional memory stored by Zazu is knowledge of previous crises of legitimacy and how they were overcome. Historical precedents become the basis for decision-making in unusual situations, ensuring the continuity of state policy even in times of extraordinary upheaval. A key element of our theory is the assumption of the existence of secret dynastic knowledge accessible only to Zazu and passed down in his family from generation to generation. This knowledge may include information about hidden lines of succession to the throne, secret agreements with neighboring kingdoms, unofficial dynastic alliances, and other aspects of state policy that, for one reason or another, were not recorded in the publicly available tradition. In historical monarchies, such secret knowledge was often kept by officials specially appointed for this purpose, which provided additional protection against usurpation of power and created a mechanism for verifying the legitimacy of pretenders to the throne. In the case of the Pride Lands, this function was probably performed by the line of royal butlers represented by Zazu. An analysis of Zazu's interactions with various social groups in Pride Lands shows that he is seen not simply as an individual advisor to a particular king, but as a representative of a supra-personal state institution. Even animals that have never interacted with him personally recognize his authority and powers, which is only possible with a long tradition of institutional recognition. It is noteworthy that after Simba's return, it is Zazu who becomes a key figure in restoring the traditional system of government. His detailed knowledge of administrative procedures, diplomatic protocols, and ceremonial etiquette allows him to quickly reintegrate Pride Lands into the system of interspecies relations that was disrupted during Scar's reign. Returning to the question of Zazu's service to previous kings, we note another piece of indirect evidence: the continuity of administrative reforms between different reigns. Many of the administrative innovations introduced under Ahadi continued to function under Mufasa in a slightly modified form. Such administrative continuity is only possible with institutional memory embodied in specific officials who survived the change of monarchs. A comparative analysis of the administrative styles of Ahadi and Mufasa reveals a curious pattern. Despite differences in the personal qualities and priorities of these rulers, the basic principles of their state policies show remarkable similarities. This similarity can be explained by the influence of a single source of administrative tradition, the line of royal advisors represented by Zazu and his predecessors. In the next and final part of our analysis, we will examine how this new understanding of Zazu's role changes our perception of the political structure of the Pride Lands, and what implications this theory has for the interpretation of key moments in the Lion King saga. If we accept the theory that Zazu is a representative of the ancient institution of royal majordomos, key scenes from the Lion King franchise appear in a completely new light. What previously seemed like simple interactions between a servant and his master are now revealed as complex political dynamics between different institutions of power in the Pride Lands. Consider the famous morning scene on Pride Rock, where Zazu presents Mufasa with his daily report. Through the lens of our theory, this is no longer just a routine report, but a constitutional procedure that ensures informed governance. Notice how Zazu doesn't just list facts, but interprets them, offers solutions, and even hints at previous historical precedents. These are not the actions of a servant, but of a state minister performing an administrative function. The ceremony of presenting the newborn Simba also takes on new meaning. Note Zazu's position during this ritual. He is not among the ordinary subjects, but in a privileged position next to the royal family. His participation in the ceremony symbolizes the administrative recognition of the new heir, complementing Rafiki's spiritual blessing. This is a classic division of secular and spiritual powers, characteristic of developed monarchical systems. The episode of the young Simba's training can now be interpreted as a formal transfer of state knowledge to the heir to the throne. Zazu is not simply looking after the prince, he is acting as a royal mentor, passing on to the future monarch not only factual knowledge about the kingdom, but also an understanding of the principles of governance. It is characteristic that in these scenes, Zazu often appeals to traditions and duties, emphasizing the institutional rather than personal nature of royal power. The period of Shram's usurpation is of particular interest to our theory. Zazu's imprisonment symbolizes the suppression of constitutional mechanisms of control over monarchical power. It is noteworthy that even under these conditions, Zazu continues to perform minimal ceremonial functions, preserving the continuity of state ritual. This situation has numerous historical parallels, from the Babylonian captivity to the nominal preservation of the offices of the Roman Senate during the Empire. Simba's return and the restoration of legitimate rule demonstrate another aspect of Zazu's institutional role. Despite Simba's long absence and his inexperience in state affairs, the restoration of the traditional system of government is surprisingly rapid. This is only possible thanks to the preservation of institutional memory, embodied in the office of the royal butler. Zazu ensures a smooth transition of power by restoring administrative procedures and diplomatic ties. The political structure of the Pride Lands, which at first glance appears to be an absolute monarchy, on closer inspection reveals itself to be a complex system with built-in institutions of control. The king has supreme power, but his decisions are limited and mediated by several independent institutions. The spiritual authority of Rafiki, the administrative expertise of Zazu, and the collective influence of the lionesses of the Pride. This system of checks and balances ensures the stability of the state even in times of crisis. Zazu's role in this political structure can be compared to that of a Lord Chancellor in the British tradition or a Grand Vizier in the Ottoman system. He is the head of the civil administration, an advisor to the monarch, and the guardian of constitutional tradition. At the same time, his belonging to a different biological species guarantees that he will never be a direct contender for the throne, which ensures the independence of his advice and administrative decisions. The historical necessity of such a position is evident when analyzing the problems faced by a lion monarchy. The physical limitations of lions as a species, inability to fly, relatively low mobility, limited communication with other species, necessitate the existence of an administrative position to compensate for these shortcomings. In addition, the relatively short lifespan of lions creates a problem of knowledge continuity, which is solved through a parallel line of administrative officials. An analysis of historical political systems provides numerous parallels with the power structure we have described in the Pride Lands. As in the case of the Merovingian kings of the Frankish state, actual administrative power may be exercised by mayors, while the monarch retains symbolic and sacred authority. As in the Byzantine Empire, the civil and military branches of government may be institutionally separated, with different officials responsible for different aspects of state administration. A particularly telling parallel can be drawn with the Japanese Bakufu system, where the emperor retained formal sovereignty, while real power was exercised through a complex bureaucratic apparatus headed by the shogun and his administration. In Pride Lands, the king, like the Japanese emperor, is a symbol of national unity and the supreme source of legitimacy, while day-to-day administrative functions are delegated to a specialized state institution represented by Zazu. Summarizing all the evidence presented in support of the dynastic guardian theory, we can confidently assert that the Zazu is not simply an individual advisor, but a representative of a hereditary institutional order that has existed for many generations of Pride Lands rulers. This position ensures administrative continuity, the preservation of state traditions, and the balancing of the monarch's power through a system of institutional constraints. The key historical and political conclusion of our analysis is the recognition of the importance of institutions that outlive individual rulers. The stability of the state system of the Pride Lands is based not only and not so much on the personal qualities of specific monarchs, as on the strength of the institutional structure that ensures continuity of government when rulers change. The position held by Zazu is one of the central elements of this structure, guaranteeing the preservation of state tradition even in periods of dynastic crisis. This conclusion has far-reaching implications for our understanding of the political dynamics of Pride Lands. It suggests that even seemingly autocratic decisions by kings, such as the expulsion of hyenas or the establishment of new alliances, are in fact the result of complex institutional interactions between the monarch, his administrative apparatus, and his spiritual advisors. This explains the remarkable stability of Pride Lands' state policy over several reigns, despite differences in the personal qualities and priorities of the monarchs. Looking ahead, one may wonder what fate awaits Zazu's political role during Simba's reign and beyond. Simba grew up outside the traditional system of court education, influenced by the philosophy of Hakuna Matata, which implies a rejection of formalities and hierarchies. How will this worldview affect his interaction with traditional state institutions, including the position of royal butler? We are likely to see some modernization of the relationship between the monarch and his administrative apparatus. Simba may seek greater directness in governance, less formalization, and broader delegation of authority. However, the basic institutional structure, including the position of royal butler, is likely to remain in place, adapting to new conditions and priorities. Of particular interest is the question of Zazu's potential successor. If our theory about the hereditary nature of his position is correct, then at some point we should see a process of power transfer to the next representative of this administrative line. This moment of institutional succession could confirm our assumptions about the nature of the position of royal majordomo in Pride Lands. The broader context of our analysis touches on a fundamental question of political theory. How is the continuity of state power ensured when individuals change? In the case of Pride Lands, the answer lies in the existence of parallel lines of power and knowledge transfer: the dynastic line of monarchs and the administrative line of butlers. These two lines complement each other, ensuring both sacred legitimacy and practical effectiveness of governance. The final aha moment of our theory lies in understanding Zazu as a symbol of the continuity of power and the true defender of the dynasty. Paradoxically, it is the bird, physically incapable of claiming the lion's throne, that turns out to be the most consistent guardian of the monarchical tradition. Zazu protects not so much a specific king as the very idea of a legitimate monarchy based on traditional values and procedures. His true loyalty is not to the person of the ruler, but to the institution of the crown, which embodies the unity of the state of Pride Lands. This concept offers a new perspective on the classic dichotomy between the individual and the institution in political theory. Zazu demonstrates how service to the idea of the state can be more enduring and principled than personal loyalty to a particular ruler. His example refutes the simplistic understanding of monarchy as a system based solely on the personal power and charisma of the leader. In conclusion, our analysis of Zazu's role as a dynastic guardian not only enriches our understanding of the political structure of Pride Lands, but also offers an interesting perspective for understanding real historical monarchies. It demonstrates that even in systems that appear absolutist, there are always institutional mechanisms that limit the power of the monarch and ensure the continuity of state tradition, regardless of the identity of the ruler. Zazu thus emerges not as a comic secondary character, but as the embodiment of one of the oldest and most important political institutions in the Pride Lands, the royal administration, whose history may predate the current dynasty itself, and whose importance to the stability of the state cannot be overstated. In this context, even his jokes and witticisms take on a new meaning, as a manifestation of institutional freedom unavailable to ordinary subjects and symbolizing the special status of his position in the kingdom's political hierarchy.